I met Anita at Williams College back in 1977 when we were both first-year students. She was, and probably still is, one of the most compassionate, thoughtful, incredible listener. One thing that stood out for me was she was just fearless. She had a real sense of justice, right from the get-go. She became very involved at Williams with the anti-apartheid movement and very involved with getting Williams to divest in South African corporations. She was always respectful, but always very forthright, and just a growing sense of outrage at times with regard to how the system was, but also the belief and the determination to change that.
From day one, I was honored to experience the thoughtful way in which she interacted with law students, new lawyers, people who worked for her. Her goal is always to make everyone around her better. She leads a life of service, and it's very hard to be around her special brand of service without wanting to emulate that. She knows that representation matters, and so she understands and does whatever she can in a given moment to fill any gaps that exist and to reach into places and spaces where maybe there hadn't been a lot of outreach before. Wherever Justice Earls goes, the wake she leaves is a better one.
Justice Anita Earls has a long career in civil rights and voting rights. I take a lot of inspiration from her for my career. She created the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. They still work in making sure people's democratic right and voting rights are being protected. What stood out to me is she is so humble. Clerking for her and seeing that every day, you were constantly inspired. Here is someone who sits on the highest bench in the state of North Carolina, and she has such humility. She is bad to the bone, but she is so humble, and that is so inspiring. Her mentoring legacy, it's not only within North Carolina, it's throughout the country. You can't call yourself a true leader if you are not investing in the ones who will come after you. Justice Earls is a true leader because she invested in the next generation and showing them the way.
So I've long admired, even before I clerked with her work, her broader civil rights and legal advocacy and contributions, not only to North Carolina and other places in the South, but nationally. And I learned so much from her leadership, her brilliance, and felt the impact of her example as a Black woman in the law who has refused to shrink herself to fit into spaces that I think were not traditionally built for us. I don't think she just interprets the Constitution. I think she insists it lives up to its promise in everything that she does and in every case that she decides. She has made space for others, not just by entering, but by holding the door open behind her. And so I think her legacy will be one of moral clarity, of constitutional courage, and truly of an unshakable belief that justice must be more than ornamental. She didn't simply argue cases as a lawyer. She changed the landscape of democracy in the South with respect to voting rights and other civil rights. The most radical act that any of us can take is to remember the people the law forgets. And I think that's her legacy. And, fortunately, we're all inheritors of it and will be in the future.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this honor. As a former civil rights and voting rights attorney, it is especially meaningful to me to receive an award named for Margaret Brent, whose life and legacy deserves to be celebrated. I'm humbled to be in the company of such impressive fellow honorees and to join the monumental list of former honorees, some of whom have been mentors to me. I know that I stand before you now only because of the amazing young women that I have had the great fortune to work with throughout my career. They have encouraged and inspired me, taught me more than they will ever appreciate, and given me the strength to carry on in the face of what sometimes can feel like overwhelming obstacles. I'm grateful to the American Bar Association and the Commission on Women for daring to acknowledge the achievement of women in the profession at a time when doing so is so fraught with peril. And I say that from personal experience of having been investigated for alleged ethical violations and threatened with removal from the bench, because I sought to explain why fewer women and advocates of color argue in the North Carolina Supreme Court, and I made suggestions about what might be done to correct that situation. Judicial independence is seriously under attack right now at the state and federal levels, and it is the duty and solemn responsibility of the ABA to stand up for the rule of law and the principles of equal justice under law that our democracy depend on. Those concepts are not merely lofty window dressing. They play out each day in courtrooms across the country. If lawyers do not articulate right from wrong and judges and juries distinguish truth from lies, we will be lost as a nation. Let me say a word about nurturing the next generations of women lawyers. One source of my passion for mentoring new attorneys comes from the philosophy of Ella Baker, Bob Moses, and other leaders of the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer. Namely, that true leadership develops, encourages, and fosters others to be leaders. It requires understanding how to bring out the best in every person, supporting others to follow their passion, and enabling them to achieve their highest potential. That is the kind of leader I have always aspired to be. Sometimes that means taking a back seat so others can shine, but always it means you are vastly multiplying your power. Second, I believe that the greatest gift you can give anyone is the chance you never had. That comes from my parents' example. Neither of them were able to graduate from a four-year college or go to a professional school. My mother, because her family couldn't afford it, and my father, because he was a black man growing up in the Jim Crow era. Their greatest determination was to give me the opportunities they never had, and so I wanted to give that gift to others. Little did I know how rewarding it would be to do so. When I was about 8 years out of law school, a case I litigated at the trial level went to the U.S. Supreme Court. I wrote the first draft of the Supreme Court brief and wanted to make the oral argument. Instead, the decision was made to ask noted Supreme Court veteran and preeminent civil rights attorney Julius Chambers to argue the case. I sat next to him at counsel table, and it is still one of the highlights of my legal career. However, many years later, another case I worked on made its way to the Supreme Court. I can't begin to describe how proud I was to see the young woman I hired out of law school, then in her 9th year of practice, argue the case. She went on the next year to argue a second case before that court, and now she sits with me on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Yeah. I highly recommend looking for ways to give others the chance you never had. We are at a moment in history where it is incumbent on us to stand up, speak out, and be strong for the basic core values of our democracy and our system of justice. People's lives depend on us. As women following in the footsteps of Margaret Brent and so many other bold female leaders, we cannot back down, put our heads in the sand, or shy away from the challenges. Thank you for this opportunity to speak and for the generous recognition which means so much to me because of the environment in which I serve. We all need to have each other's backs. I am so grateful for your support. Thank you.